Okay, so it's 5:30. Are you happy for us to get started, Mita?
I am.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everybody for coming to this, our second webinar since the Young Trustees Digital Hub went live. My name is Leon. For those of you that came last week, you would have seen that I was in the other seat answering questions. I was sat in exactly the same place, but in the other seat for a webinar answering the questions. And this week I have the absolute delight of hosting this webinar, which has been titled, Why Should Boards Have Young Trustees? And I'm joined by Jonathan Levy, who I will let introduce himself now.
Thank you, Leo. Yep, so I can confirm I am Jonathan Levy. I'm in the latter end of my 20s. I've been a trustee, though, since I was 22, and I live, we've just been discussing our geography, you might have ever heard that conversation. I live in Warrington in the Northwest, so I'm ambassador for the Northwest movement, well, Northwest part of the Young Trustees movement.
And where are you a trustee?
I'm a trustee, I should have said that. I'm a trustee at a disability charity called Dyspraxia. Very briefly, I know most people probably haven't heard of dyspraxia, that's fine. Dyspraxia is like a physical dyslexia, finding gross motor skills.
Great, thanks for that. And so we're going to go straight into the questions that we've been working on. First of all, though, for those of you that haven't read, Jonathan is also the spotlight story this week on the Digital Hub. So if you want to find out more information about him after this, that's where you need to go. But the first question I have is, Jonathan, your story online says that you were asked to be a trustee of the organisation. What do you think of the positives and negatives of that style of recruitment?
Yeah, so first of all, I recognise that not everyone is asked to be a trustee. And I think it's important to state also, first of all, that some charities, depending on your size, various things, some charities do have difficulty recruiting trustees. In terms of positives, me being asked the end of 2013 came as a big surprise to me, really. It genuinely wasn't on my radar at all. But I suppose being asked, it definitely made me feel valued, like someone had obviously had some discussion and they felt my opinions could make a good contribution. So I definitely felt like my opinions, my voice mattered, thus increasing my confidence. And I suppose also by being asked, I felt, I really had to fulfill my role properly and almost like repay the trust placed in me. And I do think that, again, I've mentioned I'm a trustee of Dyspraxia Foundation, disability. I have dyspraxia myself. And I think, this might sound a bit harsh, but I think it's almost a bit short-sighted to think, for an organisation to think that they can best represent the community they serve, reflect what they think, how they speak, tone of voice, that kind of thing, without recognising that some communities, particularly minority backgrounds, whether it's disability, LGBT+, BAME, that kind of thing, without recognising that because lots of doors statistically are closed to these people, they might not have the confidence to apply in the first place. The statistics, all kinds of statistics about these minority backgrounds, less opportunities, less access to opportunities. So I definitely think sometimes you have to ask people to consider it because they might not proceed to applying. And also by the charity asking someone, they're more likely to have, considered this person's profile, the skills and experience they have, whilst also recognising the need, what they as a board need. As far as the negatives are concerned, I suppose by being asked, someone could just say yes without thinking about it, not really knowing anything. And because it might not be on the radar to become a trustee, they might not be as likely to stay long or take the role seriously, might be more likely to quit. I suppose you could potentially, this didn't happen with my role, but the organisation could potentially be accused of being too closed, not open enough, that kind of thing. But genuinely, my organisation, I wasn't friends with or anything like that. I live on the other side of the country. It's not like I visit regularly or anything like that. And as I mentioned at the start of answering the question, a good number of charities do actually find it really difficult to recruit. So sometimes a direct approach has to be made.
I think that's a good starting point. And actually, like you say, if one way of getting around that challenge of recruiting trustees is asking people that who are interested in the work that you do, then I guess that's a quick win. But generally, those of us that like to preach sort of best practice around recruitment would advise organisations to shift away from that. I sort of think if you're a young trustee or a potentially young trustee and an organisation asks you to be a trustee, there are enough barriers in your way anyway to get on the board. So if you can circumvent that, for your first role, then great, but absolutely then advocate for proper processes as you move forward. So why did you decide that being a trustee was the right next step for you? And, what level of knowledge did you have before joining the board? Did you know what a trustee was? I know you were 22, so you might be a little bit older than some of the people watching today. But yeah, if you could just talk us through that sort of starting point, that'd be great.
Yep. So obviously, in terms of the phrase "next step," I didn't really have a particular involvement with the charity. As it says in my member spotlight piece, the organisation found out about me basically after I wrote a newspaper feature about how my condition affects me. In my first job, I worked for a member of parliament, and I enjoyed this. But even though I knew I had my disability from a young age, I was born with it. It was really in my first job but it almost like hit me like a brick how my disability affected me. And I felt, for some reason, I felt compelled to speak out about that. So I did that. This piece won an award, and that's basically how the organisation found out about me. I attended their AGM. Then another guy who was a guy who at the time was the only other trustee who had dyspraxia, the only one at the time, he asked me to be part of an adult panel. With responsibility for media PR, because in reality I was also qualified in journalism, I freelanced in journalism, but in reality nothing really happened on this panel. And when about a year later I was asked if I wanted to become a trustee, I was used to having governance roles in politics, and I worked for a parliament. I also at the time chaired, don't judge me on this, I chaired Northwest Young Conservatives. I'd also, again, coming from politics, there's all kinds of titles and roles. So that aspect didn't faze me. So that, the formality, if you like, didn't faze me. But as far as did I really know what a trustee was concerned, I think somewhere in my head I knew they existed, but I knew very little in reality. But I knew what the word board meant because of politics and of all the kind of politics actually that goes on in politics. I knew about that kind of thing. But I didn't really know what being a trustee entailed, and I genuinely hadn't thought about becoming one. And I work in fundraising as a commentator. I think I work in fundraising, but I wasn't actually asked because I worked in fundraising, because I was right at the start of my career in fundraising. I think probably what made someone think about me is the fact I could communicate, I could articulate what I thought, and I wasn't afraid to speak my mind, if you like. Again, that's partly because I came from politics, which is full of opinions. But my only real volunteering prior to becoming a trustee was a bit of informal fundraising for a few local disability causes. But I genuinely, it's not like I climbed a formal ladder in the organisation, Dyspraxia Foundation. I didn't really know that much about them. And that's probably a good thing, because I didn't go with closed ideas, if that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. And actually, one of the questions I haven't asked you, even though the theme of today is why should boards have young trustees, is that question, why should boards have young trustees? And you sort of elaborated a bit on in your first answer about, representing the community that the organisation serves being represented on the board. But kind of with the fact that you weren't doing any volunteering with the organisation beforehand, you wrote a piece that they came across, then they invited you to. Why do you think they were interested in you as a trustee? And then the second part to the question is, why do you think the board is now sort of convinced that you should have young trustees?
Yeah. So why do I think it came across to me? I've really considered this, and genuinely, probably quite naively, in my years of being a trustee, I've never really thought particularly why did they consider me. But again, working in politics, I've been volunteering in politics as well, but working in politics, I was really struck by how so many people said, wow, you work in politics, because people have this idea, whether they like or loathe politicians, people have this idea that politics is up there. Almost like, and you read things sometimes about where politicians come from. For a record, I didn't go to university, never mind Oxford or Cambridge, but politics, a lot of people went, wow. Whereas now me working in the charity sector, no one has ever said, wow, you work in fundraising. So I think that was an element. In fact, it stood out. I was involved in politics, also as a young person as well. Again, I think in terms of communicating, there's something about words can be particularly powerful when they're on paper. And my article, my feature, which won an award, genuinely attracted a far greater response than I ever expected. And again, being qualified and a bit experienced in both broadcast and print journalism, that's an invaluable skill for any organisation, for any individual, being able to communicate. And one of the many traits of a condition like dyspraxia, which is kind of in the middle of autism and dyslexia, is but more physical, is there can sometimes be difficulties with communication. And again, I attribute this to my background in politics. I've never really been afraid to voice my opinions, because I quickly realized in politics, if I didn't voice my opinions, I could get crushed. And the second part of your question, I think, was why is my board for trustees, if you like? Well, my board, they genuinely recognise that young people, can genuinely play a part. They provide a different insight, new ideas, fresh perspective, and no one likes to say we're on a bad board or anything like that. But genuinely, I think my organisation is very good, and is increasingly good at having a warm kind of family feel, if you like. Obviously, we're not everyone's family, but so many people, they tell us at our events, that kind of thing, or even online, they've never knowingly come across someone else with a condition before. So there's a lot of friendships built up, a real feeling of inclusiveness, that kind of thing. Nowadays, we also have our own dedicated youth group. We didn't have that when I came on board. When I came on board, I was the young trustee. But even though I was the young trustee, I never had any doors closed to me. I still had like access to all areas, if you like. And I definitely asked questions from an early stage, not just about being a young person. And also, I think sometimes one of the reasons people might not think like the service user, if you like, should be on boards is because they have this conception that they'll only talk about themselves. But I myself, I recognised from immediately that I wasn't on the board to talk about myself. Yes, I have the condition, it helps to some extent with the cause, but I recognise it's about the bigger picture. So thinking about a bigger picture, but bringing fresh perspective and also inclusive too. There's no point 12 board members or whatever talking about how people with dyspraxia feel, what kind of language they like, what language they don't, without actually going to the audience. And one thing I constantly say when I'm talking about my experience externally being a trustee, the power of language. So numerous times in my early stage as a trustee, I mentioned the fact I would never describe myself as a sufferer, a person with dyspraxia, and other people with dyspraxia have said that. But without someone who is it actually saying that, the board, the charity could potentially cause offence, that kind of thing.
So throughout this, you've mentioned politics a few times, and I have not let the fact slide that you were chairing the Young Tories at some point. However, that is for a discussion at another time and place, and all political parties are welcome to the movement, of course. But one thing that it struck me as, actually, when you first got your trusteeship, you were somebody that was quite established in your local area, had already a decent set of skills through your political background. You were working for an MP. You're kind of ticking the checklist of the sorts of people I would expect to put themselves forward for trusteeships. But there will be people in the movement who might be just turned 18, they might not even be quite 18 yet, who are thinking, I think trusteeships for me because of what I've done in my voluntary world. But what do you think is the sort of number one skill you need as a trustee that most people will be able to recognise in themselves?
Yeah, well, I think even by attending this event, you've got some element of curiosity, wanting to know more, development. It's talked about a lot in society, but genuinely taking at least some responsibility for your own development is really important. And even signing up to attend this webinar, you had to at some stage sign up to our hub, taking some curiosity, a desire to know more. So myself as a trustee, and I should say, my background, I might seem established, but genuinely, I struggled through school. I only just got enough GCSEs to do A levels. I didn't go to university, and I probably wasn't going to be clever enough to go to university. So I didn't come from some privileged background in that respect. And yes, I was initially the young trustee, but I wasn't solely focused on that. Now I have more responsibility for income generation as a trustee, but I'm still interested. I still ask questions and probe about other areas too. And actually, even in my first board meeting, particularly as I was asked to be a trustee, I suspect other board members at the time, it probably increased their confidence in me by me asking questions. I suppose some people might be afraid, like some people are in life, of asking questions. but actually by me asking questions, I suspect it probably increased other board members' confidence in me that I was genuinely interested. So that might sound like quite a soft skill, curiosity, interest, but it can go such a long way, and also, build confidence. And, genuinely being one team, so even if you have various committees or whatever on your board, taking an active interest. And I've never been someone who joins or at least stays with us and them kinds of things. Yes, we are a board, we are governance, we're not primarily the operational side, but we are one team, and working together is really important. That might be a cliche, but it's what I think. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point, because the skills threshold can be as high or as low as whatever you want it to be. And I would always say to boards that the lowest threshold that you are looking for is normally someone who can work as part of a team and can ask some decent questions. You can add in everything else if you want, 5 years of accounting skills or 10 years of, I don't know, management experience or whatever, which obviously each layer you add filters people out. So I think that's a good point, actually. As long as you've got an inquisitive mind, really that's the baseline that you need. Everything else that you can bring to the table from there is a welcome addition. Now, you mentioned earlier about the importance of being someone with dyspraxia on the board of a dyspraxia charity. Do you think that your appointment was partly to do with that? So you were there to represent dyspraxia rather than your specific skill set?
Yeah, well, I was undoubtedly asked to join the board in part because I had dyspraxia myself. And of course, as I touched on, they found out about me because I wrote about dyspraxia. Then they met me for one and only time prior to me becoming a trustee at previous year's AGM. So that was undoubtedly part of it. And the board did want to be more representative of the community it served. And I applaud that fact. But in terms of my skill set, again, I've touched on politics, journalism, communication, that kind of thing. But I wasn't, it's not like every conversation they had with their board meetings, you're the person with dyspraxia, what do you think? I was genuinely treated like other trustees. They did ask me, though, about special requirements, that kind of thing, if I had any. They were mindful of that, which is important. But I genuinely felt I could contribute in various ways. And I wasn't almost patronized, or might sound silly, but patted on the head as a person with dyspraxia, that kind of thing. I genuinely felt, despite by a long way being the youngest trustee, I genuinely felt equal, which is really important. And again, my skill set, I touched on, my portfolio now is income generation, fundraising, basically. But I was only at the start of my career then. It's not like I had a 10-year track record of success or anything like that. Even my political job, I'd done that for 3 years. That was my first job. I didn't have some track record. I had enthusiasm, spoke out. I suppose I could articulate myself. So I was undoubtedly appointed because as a person with dyspraxia. If I didn't have dyspraxia, I wouldn't have written a piece. I probably wouldn't have attended the AGM. So yeah, answering your question, I was there to represent people with dyspraxia, but I was there fundamentally to make a contribution, not as a tick box exercise.
And I think there's something there that you mentioned about, okay, yes, I became a trustee at this stage in my life, but there's a whole context that has led to me getting to this stage. You didn't go to university, you're a couple of years into your job, blah, 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 blah. And I think all of that is really helpful reminder that just because of where you are now doesn't mean you don't come with lots of baggage and history. I noticed that Amy's happy to ask a question. I'll come to you in a moment, Amy. I just have one more, which is about this sort of service user representative point, which is, what if you were, or rather, let me reframe that. How or what advice would you give to somebody who feels like they have been put on a board because they represent one of the protected characteristics? So I've been put on the board because I'm gay or because I'm black or disabled or whatever. How do you marry the two up? Because you don't want to lose the insight you have as a person living with, living as that minority, but you also don't want to be the only person who has to hold that card all of the time. What advice would you give to potential young trustees, but also to boards who are thinking about recruiting young trustees?
Yeah, so I would genuinely, and I'm personally big on personal development, and again, it's one of the often used phrases, take yourself outside your comfort zone, which is easier said than done, but I would genuinely take an interest in other areas. So for example, Dyspraxia Foundation, like lots of charities, we hold conferences, that kind of thing. And it would be really easy, for a person with dyspraxia to perhaps, or any condition, to say, I'll take responsibility for organising an adults with dyspraxia conference, because it's all about what adults with dyspraxia want. But, engaging in other things, finance, at the heart of any organisation, everyone thinks everything's important, but at the heart of organisations survive by awareness, yes, awareness, but organisations fundamentally survive because of finances. So genuinely taking an interest in these things, asking questions, asking how you can play your part. And if your board if you are in the unfortunate position where your board says, oh, you're the gay one or you're the disabled one, whatever, then I would genuinely speak up about that. Boards, being a board member, you're at the highest level of governance. You're in a credible and officially responsible role. Officially, if a charity goes wrong, you could be held accountable, that kind of thing. So I would genuinely speak up and ask, one, why they selected you, or why, whether you applied or whether you, that kind of thing. Genuinely speak up and ask, and takes at least some responsibility for own learning and development. As I said in my written piece, Member Spotlight, I've chosen to undertake lots of research and training, and I've genuinely not spent much at all. Even in my paid fundraising career, the best courses I've ever attended have been some of the cheapest ones. So I've not spent hundreds or thousands of pounds at all. Some boards have better board training than others, but there's nothing to stop you, researching things online, especially nowadays. There's so much free information available online. And even also about having difficult conversations, having the confidence, how to approach these things. So that was quite a long-winded answer, but genuinely speak up and ask whoever how you can best play your part, and also what charity's biggest problems are right now, what biggest challenges are as a board.
I think that's really good advice. It's really hard often as a young trustee to be kind of the guardian of all the youth issues, which typically is digital and social media, but actually you have insight and experience from across the piece. I'm going to move to Amy now and ask her question.
Hello. So I'm one of the ambassadors, so I just thought it might be quite a good question to ask for those aspiring young trustees. So how can they set themselves apart when they're applying to boards that are recruiting, and show the boards that they actually need the young trustees? Because I think so many times, so often, when applying for boards, you're kind of like, oh, well, actually, if 5 people that have got 10 years experience above me apply for this, then they're going to get it. So I think just what your opinion would be on that would be really helpful.
Yeah. Well, I think that young people can get ahead of some of the competition, but likely the competition will be older than that, can get ahead of the competition by thoroughly researching the organisation. And frankly, and I'm still struck sometimes how people don't realise that charity accounts are online. There is such a thing as a charity commission website. Charities legally have to publish information about them. So you can almost stalk the charity, not the individuals, but you can almost, want a better word, stalk the charity online, find out as much about them as possible, read whatever reports you can find about them online. And this might sound quite mundane and what have you, but if you really want it enough, then you'll do whatever it takes to get it. So standing out in the competition by your research with charity, but knowing what you can bring, and also how you want to develop. And I'm involved in a different organisation, not as a trustee, but in a leadership role. And when it comes to recruitment, it's like, oh, you don't want young people because they'll just leave us, or they're only doing it for their career. But actually, anyone can, it can benefit. Being a trustee or whatever can benefit anyone, even if you're comfortable in your job. You never know what might happen in a few years to come or whatever. And people, again, there's this idea that charity land is all happy, but everyone actually gets something from involvement in the charity sector. We wouldn't do it otherwise. So many people, with statistics to back this up, when it comes to volunteering, which trustees are volunteers, people do it out of satisfaction. They get something from it. So know what you want, why you want it, but also know if the charity has objections or concerns about your age or whatever. Have an idea about how you might get around that. Again, training, perhaps reaching out on LinkedIn or other things, word of mouth to existing trustees. And also, there's a statistic that I only came across recently that in this country, about 500,000 people aged 16 to 24 are running, which I know we go above that, but are running their own business. That's 500,000 young business owners. You know, businesses survive on finance, that kind of thing, sustainability. And charities are charities, but actually increasingly to survive, charities have to run like businesses. That's an invaluable skill, and a board's strength lies in its collective skills, its perspectives. Again, reaching out to a wide audience, being able to think more like your audience. And also, the more diverse you are, you're reducing your risk too. Again, there's a commonly used phrase I hear in fundraising about pale, stale mail, whatever, something like that. And actually, a lot of boards and the charity sector as a whole are like that. So the more diverse you are, the more likely you are to succeed. And actually, the more diverse your organisation is, that potentially opens up more funding opportunities too. I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yeah.
I think I would add as well that there's something here about for potential young trustees who, if you're putting yourself forward for an organisation, to be a trustee of an organisation that is not a youth charity, you are already setting yourself aside from the competition. Yes. Because actually it's a very particular type of young person that wants to be a trustee. I also think if you are part of a movement like the Young Trustees movement and you've taken any governance training, then 9 out of 10 times you've probably had more governance training than anyone else around the board. So because the threshold for young people or young trustees to understand governance, I find, is always higher than it is for other candidates, which, well, whatever, like we could do a whole session on that in itself. But I'm going to move over to Eleanor, or Ellie, who has got a question to ask.
Hey, so my question is kind of two parts, but it's, so did your charity do any planning for you coming in as a young trustee, and like having you joined, have they done any evaluation?
I think my quite simple answer, at least to the first part, is no. I wasn't made aware of any at all. In terms of the evaluation bit, well, now almost half of our board has dyspraxia, and we all know why we're on a board. We all have dedicated portfolios, if you like, and this is not because of me. I think it's also partly to a considerable extent because social media has grown rapidly in recent years. Our community is much bigger now than it was. That's to a considerable extent because of social media, and again, because of social media, especially like Twitter, there's so much outrage in society now on Twitter, that kind of thing. I feel there's more accountability perhaps. So we can definitely better report that now. We can definitely provide better impact updates with the difference we're making, which is really important. So I suppose there's kind of been informal evaluation, but I've never formally been evaluated myself. But in several years on a board, I've never been kicked off. There's never been any suggestion that I'll be kicked off. I'm not going to be there for life at all. Definitely not. But I've continually played my part, and I've kept myself fresh too, because again, lots of boards, they say you only serve for 3 years and then you go. Now my boards, yeah, we do have 3-year terms, but I've stayed on longer than 3 years. But to a considerable extent, that's because I've kept myself fresh. I've kept giving things. And my fundraising career, I was only at the start of my career when I joined a board, fundraising, but now I've developed massively. So naturally, the impact I've had has been greater. And I think possibly as far as fundraising is concerned, my biggest impact has been in the last 18 months, 2 years. We had various problems, and I took a leading role in helping us to address them, and it's really paying off. So I feel like my impact has actually got greater as I've been on a board, but that does not mean I'm going to stay on a board forever. No one should stay on a board forever. You should at some point move on, as I will do.
Thanks.
So let's do a little bit of like on the spot evaluation now then, because I think you've really articulated quite well like the impact on the work that you've had. Is there anything that you wish perhaps over the last 6 years in your role, and maybe over the next however long's left in your term, there's something that you kind of feel it's not job done yet, this is something I really want to get ready for my successor or for the person who's going to replace me on the board? Is there anything in the board setup that that isn't quite there yet?
So I feel this might sound quite strange, and this might sound quite young person-ish, but whatever. For way we communicate. So again, social media's grown a lot in recent times. WhatsApp, I don't think existed back in 2014. It definitely didn't, I don't think. But so, you know, we used to have so many email exchanges, that kind of thing. And lots of emails can be difficult for anyone in life. But actually, because dyspraxia, one of its many traits is difficulties with organisation. I'd heard other people with dyspraxia say they find managing emails too difficult, overwhelming, that kind of thing. We as a board, we set up a WhatsApp group like 2 years ago. Such a basic thing, but I'm practically glued to my phone all the time. And, having this WhatsApp communication, about important board stuff, really helped me to communicate, helped me and others to communicate better have our say. And so that's really good. I kind of wish that existed. Obviously it didn't, but I kind of wish that existed at an earlier stage, because I think my views, my impact would have been articulated better, come across more widely. Me understanding, as my confidence has increased, I've taken more of a grip, if you like, at a board level of income generation. Me having more regular meetings now with the chief executive of a charity to discuss our progress, whilst not interfering, not doing much operational stuff, but me, more firmly being on it, if you like. And that's not any disrespect to the charity staff itself; they're wonderful and long-serving too. But I think me having more of a grip of it, and actually really understanding the leading staff's communication styles too. I've only really realised, quite naively in the last 2 years, our chief executive much prefers phone calls to emails. And that's a really simplistic thing. But with more phone calls and currently Zoom calls as well, it makes such a difference. I called her just today. We had a really good chat. And she always thanks me really enthusiastically afterwards. We get on really well. We always have. But we just wouldn't have had that rapport if we just stuck to emails.
No, that's really helpful. I think those sort of soft elements are really what makes the board thrive. I think you can survive on a board by knowing a bit about governance, having an inquisitive mind, and kind of knowing your stuff. But actually, for any board to thrive, you need to know the soft pinch points that make the team work well and make the dream work. So during this conversation, the last half an hour or so, we've spoken quite a bit about boards and why they should have young trustees, why they should have service users representing the services that they deliver. Why do you think, though, that young people should consider becoming trustees? I know half the battle is won for the people who are watching this because they're already inquiring about it. But if they're sat there thinking, oh, I'm not sure this is for me, what would be your pitch?
Yeah, well, obviously, as a trustee, you're giving your time, you're not paid, you're giving various things. But it's not selfish to think about what you can gain too. And I think some people in life are almost, apologetic for thinking they might get something from it. But invariably, everyone does, whether we realize it or not. And young people, including myself in recent years, can gain invaluable skills and development. Myself, I've gained skills development in finance. My confidence has increased. My knowledge, my understanding of the charity sector and to extent business is developed too. Also, leadership, my leadership skills have invariably undoubtedly developed too. And if we really think about the society we want to see, if we don't think, we can play our part now and show others a way, well, what's going to change in 5-10 years from now? If we really want, to society to develop, be more like us, we have to take a leading step. And again, people attending something like this are by far in a minority. And I'm always wary sometimes, we in this webinar, we can talk amongst ourselves, but we have got to reach out to others sometimes. And as I've already touched on the fact the board's strengths lies in its collective skills, that kind of thing. But young people can gain so much from it. And it's not selfish actually to think like that. As long as you're not only applying to be a trustee just for yourself, which most people don't do actually, I think, you can get a lot from it. And I've loved my time as a trustee. I've gained far more from it than I ever expected. And I really mean that. And finally, on that note, I've already touched on the fact I work professionally for a different charity in the charity sector. And being both, I know it applies to others too, and being both a charity employee and a charity trustee is a great experience, as I've mentioned in my member spotlight piece, because you get to see both elements. I suppose it's a bit like that in business too, to some extent. I distinctly remember in my first charity job, my first fundraising job, we once had an open board meeting. Staff were invited to each present on their work. I was the youngest employee. All the other staff, like the other 15 staff, were all like terrified beforehand. These were confident, credible people. It was like these trustees were on a different planet. But me, I was so calm and chilled about it. It mattered to me, but I was so calm and chilled about it because I realised we're a different level, kind of, different part of the organisation, but we're all in it together in terms of helping the charity survive and develop.
I think lots of people who are already trustees will share that thought that there is something quite mysterious about a board of trustees for most staff charities, because most of them can't even name their trustees, because there's a weird, I think it's elitist, but there's this weird sort of elitist view that, you know, the board is up here and everyone else is sort of down here, and the two don't get to mingle unless you're in the senior team. I was going to ask you the question, do you think that being a trustee has helped you in your day job, but you've already answered it. Do you think then, because your career has changed slightly, moving out of politics into fundraising, do you think that, or has your organisation started to utilise your changing skill set yet? Have they asked you about fundraising stuff? Are you working on any fundraising projects, or what's the shift like?
Yeah, I think my skill set has developed more than changed. Yes, professionally, I don't work for an MP now. I work in fundraising. I'm still involved in politics voluntarily. And my skill set has undoubtedly developed. And unintentionally, again, I'm quite good at joining boards, committees without asking. But unintentionally, I've ended up joining a fundraising board, Institute fundraising convention, a major fundraising event. I've joined their board and other things too. So my network has grew massively. And that has undoubtedly been a benefit to the charity. Again, me being part of the professional body for fundraising, which you spoke at Institute Fundraising Conference before I watched you 2 years ago. It's weird how here we are now. Being part of the Institute of Fundraising and involved in it, I insisted our next fundraising employee was at least involved to some extent in the Institute of Fundraising. They're actually a board member of the Institute of Fundraising, which helps too. A different board to one I'm on. And it's having that professionalism, that status, qualification, gives further assurance that we know what we're doing. We're also looking outside our organisation to best practice. Again, I subscribe professionally to all kinds of email bulletins, and they can be of benefit both to my charity I work for, my paid job, and the Dyspraxia Foundation. So undoubtedly the charity's benefits, particularly in recent times, from my professional skills. As I developed in my career, I've grown in confidence amongst other things. And yeah, me having a large network too has been really beneficial. And when I step down from a board, I will lead a search for my replacement. Both trustees will approve them or reject them. And again, that will come from my wide network of fundraisers.
Have you ever experienced a situation where people are, I don't know what quite the right word is, but almost like suspicious that you've done what you've done? Like, why, you know, 28 years old, you've had a pretty decent day job career to date so far, you are serving on the IOF convention board or one of the IOF committees, you're a trustee. Does anyone ever ask you, like, kind of why have you been doing this, and actually almost been a little bit suspicious of you?
Well, I know some people in life are, but has anyone been suspicious of me? Possibly, I don't know. You know, they never said that. Probably, but again, I attribute my numerous titles to coming from politics. Before being in politics, I never had any desire to, I want this role, I want that role, I want to stand out. I suppose I just gained so much, keep talking about it, but I suppose my eyes were open so much to all these roles amongst other roles, highly competitive, all kinds of politics in the politics, regardless of what party you are, there is in each party. I suppose my eyes were open to that. I've always, from that stage, from the age of 18, 10 years ago, I've been someone who puts myself forward to things. Do some people think I'm careerist, I'm arrogant? Probably, I'm not arrogant, but some people probably think that. But, you know, what I'm doing is for a good cause. I'm not being paid as a trustee. Just for this meeting in my Dyspraxia board WhatsApp group, someone was saying some of our community don't realise we're not paid. And that's true. And some people probably think me being a young trustees movement ambassador, I'm being paid a big salary. No, I'm not. So some people probably are sceptical, but so what? It doesn't hold me back, because I'm passionate. I see myself long-term in a charity sector. And people in the charity sector recognise the benefit of what we do. So if people are suspicious of me, So what? I've got a track, it sounds arrogant, but I've got a track record to back these things up. And there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance. And I've definitely got confidence rather than arrogance. And to boost that finally, to build on that, I'm constantly seeking to be the best I can be and develop my skills.
Great. And if you were, because we're moving towards the end now, I'd like to hand back over to Mita in a moment to just kind of outline the next couple of weeks. But if you were to give a 30-second, 1-minute pitch, of which you've got your own clock so can watch on your computer, to an organisation who was thinking about young trustees, what would be your pitch to convince them on why they should do it?
Yeah. Young people have so much to offer. Embracing diversity, which lots of organisations are talking about now, is not just about the diversity of those in the room. It's about what happens next, the next stage, how we can implement that, manage reducing risk too. I've already touched on the fact 500,000 at least people in this country, young people, are running their own businesses. A board's strength lies in its collective skills, finance. Also, I suspect some young people are more willing to learn than others. They can bring so much, but for me, the main thing that stands out, it's about future-proofing, finding your next, not just trustees, but finding your next leaders too, addressing the way the organisation wants to move, build upon, thinking about the future, long-term future. Some charities end up ceasing because they've been thinking too short-term. You really have to reach out too. And the more diverse an organisation is, actually opens up more funding opportunities too. Sustainability is fundamental. Charities survive on finance, and young people can play a key part with a love of learning too. I hope that's an okay-ish pitch.
Well, I'm already convinced, but I'm even more convinced after that. So thank you very much. I'm just checking the chat to see if there are any last minute questions coming in. I don't think there are. So thank you very much. I really enjoyed that. I realized that the topic was why should boards have young trustees, but we thrashed out a couple of issues there. And I suppose some of the key takeaways for me are around, if I was a prospective young trustee, is around thinking, as long as I've got an inquisitive mind, and I can work well as a team, then I'm a pretty decent candidate for being a young trustee. I think something that you said that really resonates, simple suggestions can be really helpful and can really change the culture in a board. I think you said it's just a WhatsApp group, that's so simple, yet it's completely shifted the way that your board works. I think something else that we teased out, which I thought was helpful, is that everyone has a context. And I think that's really helpful to know as a young trustee going into the interview room, trying to get rid of that chip on your shoulder as the young person and realizing that every single person in that room was your age at some point. Lots of them would have experienced some of the same hardships or difficulties that you have, but just because they're not talking about it, it doesn't mean that hasn't happened to them. And there's something really interesting there. And then last one, I think what you were talking about around making sure that service user voice is threaded into the board is a really good way of keeping that organization true to its values, keeping its feet to the fire, and I guess just keeping it true to itself. So that's a little summary from me. Thank you very much for everyone that joined and for the questions in the chat, and a special thank you to Jonathan for joining me this evening. I'm going to hand back over to Mita to tell you about what's coming up.
Thanks so much. And I think we've just heard a thanks from the chat as well. So thank you again to Leon and Jonathan for hosting today. They are both ambassadors across England and Wales. You all have an ambassador. So if you want to get involved in the movement somehow and connect with them, please do so on the Digital Hub. Next week, we'll be exploring the theme, what will you get from being a trustee? So if you have any questions around that, please ask them on the Digital Hub, because every week Meg, along with these chats, will be researching the answers to your questions and posting them on Friday. So join us here next week, where we'll be talking to Ellie Harding, who is the Young Trustees Movement Ambassador for London. And other than that, have a great evening, everyone. Goodbye.